Only a few folks comment about this subject as they're shopping. The sad reality is that for many people, the circumstances that cause a need for a wheelchair van change in as little as a few months or a year or two. This is a sensitive subject, and in some ways I hesitate to talk about it, but I think this is helpful for the financial lives and logistics of people buying wheelchair vans. Often I get calls from people only a few months or a year or two after they bought a van from me or someone else, and they're wanting to sell it. And oftentimes they say that the van has been used very little. Sometimes it's only been driven a few thousand or even a few hundred miles. And so then comes the reality of selling it. Even if a normal vehicle and a wheelchair van were comparable in terms of ease or difficulty of selling, most people would find that selling the wheelchair van, with the added emotional elements that go along with it, would be a process that would be nice to avoid or keep as simple as possible. But depending on how big or small the population is of the area, it can be very difficult for a private seller to get their wheelchair van sold, and rarely will it sell for a price near what was initially paid. The reason is simply because even if the van happens to be in an area with a large population, most people who are prepared to pay a retail sum of money for a wheelchair van usually want to buy it from a specialty dealer. Actually, they may not have started out thinking that. In fact, they may have originally thought they would want to buy from a private seller, but then they learn how the market for wheelchair vans actually works. And as far as that goes, what is by far the norm, and what people tell me they usually discover, is that wheelchair vans that are more than a few years old that are being sold by private sellers are usually not in good enough condition to satisfy them. Such vans being privately sold usually have many mechanical and cosmetic elements that need attention. And most people who are already dealing with the major challenges in their family that lead to needing a wheelchair van don't want to deal with buying a van that has problems, even if they're not major ones. And so most of the buyers of wheelchair vans decide at some point on their path that they prefer to buy their van from a specialty dealer, and so even if you have a nice van to sell, it can be very difficult. All of that sets the stage for the following suggestions regarding how I believe people buying a wheelchair van can help themselves emotionally and financially when the time comes for selling the van. I have 4 different tips here that will be helpful for you to keep in mind. You'll be glad you did when it comes time to sell. These tips will help you financially as well as logistically, and this information can reduce the time and emotions you'll have to invest in the liquidating process. My first tip is to ask the professional seller what their perspective is about eventually buying the van back from you. My attitude as a dealer is that I'm usually very interested in buying a van that I've sold in the past because I'm very familiar with it and have already invested into the process of improving its condition. Most dealers feel the same as I do about this. Of course, when you sell a van back to the dealer, they'll have to buy it for a notable amount less than what you paid for it in order to allow them a margin for preparing it for sale again and covering some overhead and making a fair profit. However, even when it costs you thousands of dollars to use the van for a few months or a year or two, it can be a substantial relief to not have to prepare, advertise, show the van, and then handle the paperwork. And of course, if the subject of the van is emotional for you, the peace and ease of a quick sale can have great value. The next suggestion I have is that you ought to consider that the higher the price is of whatever van you buy, the more dollars of depreciation you're going to incur when selling it. What I've observed as I watch the market for these vans of all ages and prices is this. When people buy a wheelchair van using the same theories, ideas, and practices as they do with normal vehicles, there can be a big shock and a big awakener when trying to sell it, especially if that sale is only months or a year or two after it was purchased. It can be painful to realize that after a short period of time, and possibly not very many miles, that the van has a value as a private seller that is a big percentage less than what was paid for it. However much money a person expects a regular vehicle to depreciate, the real-world truth is that a wheelchair van usually depreciates more, which is unfortunate. But wheelchair vans are absolutely necessary, wonderful tools that help dramatically improve the lives of the person in the wheelchair and their family. And for those reasons, wheelchair vans are wonderful, even if they often cost a sizable sum to use, even if for a short period of time. And so the simple equation that holds true in nearly every case is that the less you pay for a wheelchair van when you buy it, the less it will have cost you to use it over a given period of time. Of course, I'm not suggesting you buy a piece of junk, but once you get above $10,000 to $15,000, these truths do apply. For example, let's say you were to buy a van for $35,000 and use it for a year and 5,000 miles. And then let's consider if you were to sell it for $23,000 to $25,000. That small amount of time and miles would cost $10,000 to $12,000. However, if a van a few years older were $20,000 and it were used for the same amount of time and miles and it sold for, let's say, $12,000 to $14,000, the limited use would cost $6,000 to $8,000 rather than $10,000 to $12,000 on the higher price van. That's several $1,000s difference in depreciation between the two scenarios, but that's only half the story. Another big factor is that the higher price van is usually much harder to sell and will take much longer. And as far as comparing a $35,000 van to one for $20,000, there's usually not a substantial difference in features, comfort, or reliability. At least nowhere near the percentage increase in going from $20,000 to $35,000. This brings up a great thing about wheelchair vans. Mobility features don't change a great amount over a period of 5 or 10 years. They're not fashion items, nor are they super high tech. They just don't change very much or very quickly in a number of years. And so you can find a nice van for 20 or a nicer one for 35, but in my opinion, the one for 35 is not enough different or better for most people to justify the extra cost. So now here's my suggestion. Buy as low a miles as you can find that's in your price range. In my 35 years in various aspects of the auto industry, I've seen the benefit of low miles show up countless times as being a huge factor when selling a vehicle. The reality is that most buyers will accept average miles, and some will accept high miles, but everyone loves low miles. And so wheelchair vans, as with all other vehicles, benefit greatly from low miles. And so I suggest you buy a van with as low a miles as you can find that's in your price range. And when it comes time to sell the van, you'll be glad you did. The last of my suggestions on the topic of thinking about selling when you're buying is this. Try to buy a van with as many mobility features as fits in your price range. I think this may be the most overlooked idea of the 4 I'm suggesting here. Consider that when you're ready to sell your wheelchair van, there are people who will want or need more features than what you or your family's needs required. And so even though you may not have needed certain features, the next person may need them. And if your van has those features you didn't need, but the other person needs, your chances of selling the van will increase greatly. The fact is, more mobility features not only helps make the sale, but makes the van more valuable to a larger number of people. This is true no matter if selling to a dealer or a private party. And I'll add that if you buy a van with extra mobility features than what you currently need, and then your needs change, having bought a van with extra features can literally prevent you from having to buy another van or having to spend many thousands of dollars for changes. I hope this information helps you to make the best possible decision when you buy a wheelchair van. Being thoughtful of these various ideas not only can save you money when buying a van and make selling it someday easier and with less depreciation, but this information can also help you get more clear about what it is that you really want